Hi guys, it's Jessie Rhines, yoga therapist with Evolutions, and it's Labor Day. Happy Labor Day. I fit in my potentially last beach day, at least of the summertime. My two sons, who are in a room right below me playing Minecraft, so they might be audible from time to time, are going back to school on Wednesday. And I think this is a really great time for us to jump into yoga psychology, what I'm going to call yoga psychology, which is actually just the big yoga, or what yoga is in most of the world. I'm reading a fantastic book called The Inner Tradition of Yoga by the late and brilliant Michael Stone. And I think this will likely not be the last time that I work with this book in my Mindful Monday videos, because it's such a rich book. I would recommend it for those of you that have a thirst to understand the deeper practice of yoga. It's sometimes hard to find texts that are not esoteric or translated several times. And this is from a Westerner who studied the East. So if that's also what you are, he might be a great bridge to yoga. There's other, perhaps more beginner level books that I would recommend. You can always ping me and I'll share my list with you. This one is a bit more advanced, but I don't think it's too much for most of you. If you're here, I bet it could be a great deeper step if you already have a bit of an understanding about how yoga is a lot more than the physical practice. I really love this book. I'm happy to find it. So one reason why I thought it might be helpful to jump into this is because I myself am about to jump into more challenge with my children schooling from home and doing my counseling practice in the evenings. I know I'm not alone in being a parent in these times, and even if you're not, there might be something about this back to school time that feels studious to you. I know that's true for many of us. Or there might be other challenges that come with this time, or that have been coming all along. So let's dive in. I love this quote. Yoga is essentially concerned with teaching us to perceive and respond to reality in such a way that we can transform our perceptions and responses to suffering so that the suffering is resolved. Is that worth reading again, I wonder? Yoga is essentially concerned with teaching us to perceive and respond to reality in such a way that we can transform our perceptions and responses to suffering so that the suffering is resolved. I'm going to jump around a little bit. The aim of the yoga path is to recognize suffering in its various manifestations and to cultivate the skills necessary to bring the suffering to an end. So in yoga, we believe that pain is not optional, that pain is part of life. That's a very Buddhist saying. Perhaps you've heard, life is suffering. I would put it into yogic language a little more and say that pain and life are intertwined, and we cannot escape discomfort, challenge. Suffering is what we add to pain with our stories. I'll read on a little bit. Any type of stress, whether physical, mental, or emotional, causes tension in our bodies. These stresses accumulate from static, repetitive, or sustained posture. Posture can include physiological holding patterns, but according to the theory of yoga, all postural holding patterns are always both physiological and psychological. So there's a lot between that first piece and this about the kinds of suffering that we get into and how our stories add, and then eventually how that trickles down to the body. There's a lot more I could read, and a lot more that I'll have to read, and I'll also be writing a lot more in the fall for Evolution's blog, and I'll be happy to share this. But I want to share one more thing before we get into a pose. The kind of attention that subtle asana practice, asana is the postures, the movements, requires, focuses the mind on process rather than structure, change rather than stability, and flow rather than discrete movements. As we go deeper into the material, we find not building blocks or pieces in the body in conversation, but rather a complicated web of relations between various parts of the whole. Yoga is synonymous with that whole. The body and mind that first appear to the practitioner as solid structures eventually reveal themselves as constantly changing, because any structure is, at its base, process. Yoga is the practice of attending to this process. Yoga returns us to the undivided wholeness and intimate interconnection of reality. I realize I just dropped you right into the middle of a text that should be read very slowly, but I wanted to fit in just that little bit more. He's talking about the subtle attention that we must pay, and then the poses become much more than the poses. We realize that everything is always changing. Even if we start with simply feeling an inhale in this pose and an exhale from this pose, and then how that changes as we hold the pose, we are witnessing change. We are witnessing our ability to watch as reality comes and goes. We are working to watch how the mind might attach story, like I hate this pose, or get me out of this pose, or I love this pose, or I'm so badass because I can do this pose, or any other number of stories, and those as well come and they go. So in a moment where I'm about to jump into some challenge, and I know I'm not alone, I thought it would be a really great time for us to work with a challenging posture. What's a challenging posture to you? I can't know. So I'll be offering choices. I'm going to work with bridge at first, and we'll move up to full wheel. It's really important that you do not move on to anything that is too hard for you, anything that does not feel okay in the body, anything where you start to take a step towards it and you cannot breathe deeply. I'll talk you through that. Because the goal here is for us to all find our own challenging point, our own line. In yoga, there is always something more that we cannot do, right? And that is always changing depending on what's happening in our body, depending on the day, depending on the year. The goal is to find a place of edge. I am challenged, but I'm not hurting myself. Remembering ahimsa, nonviolence, our first of our 10 ethical precepts. And to play with that edge a little bit, to breathe, to feel the struggle today, and see if we can just practice watching things rise and fall. This is a lot about yoga psychology, as Michael Stone calls it. This is a lot of what I do in my private practice with yoga therapy. But I want to just give you a taste. What you're going to get a taste of is something that I implore you to do more of on your own and to do in your own yoga classes. Once is not, of course, going to necessarily prepare you for all the challenges of this next year or month or even week or day. So we come back to the mat often in this kind of way. Thank you for listening this far, humoring me, or being a fellow yoga geek, anywhere along that whole spectrum. And let's jump in. So we'll come to our mat, and I would recommend a bit of a warm-up, right? Because we wouldn't want to come into a challenging posture, boom, just like that. I know many stories of yogis who jumped into poses for a photograph without being warm and injured themselves, and it makes sense that they would have, right? So let's come to bring our spine along the mat and our feet against the floor. And we'll just start with a little tuck and roll so that you feel this lowest curve, this lordotic curve, flatten against the mat. As you do the opposite and lift so that you can create a little tunnel, see my fingers, peekaboo, you're going to feel arch in the back. And we're going to do that with the breath. So let's exhale. Hands can be on the belly or on the mat. And inhale, as you fill that belly, it's as though a balloon lifts and you arch. Feet are wide, meaning you're spreading the toes. The feet are about hips distance apart, not wider than that, but they're wide in and of themselves so that we start to plant, just like you would with hands. Eyes can close if you like, and what I'd like for you to do is just little by little, arch just a little less, and as you flatten the curve, press down a little more. You might even lift the tippy tailbone off of the ground, and just start to get connected to a tail that comes through the legs and maybe touches the nose in your imagination. You're moving at your slow breath. Not mine. Perhaps you're finding an ocean breath to slow it down even more. Perhaps you're simply working to take full breaths, which lengthens the whole shebang. And at some point, you're going to really start to use your glutes and turn those on and crunch and squeeze and turn on the buns. And then relax. And we're going to start to lift just a little bit more. And I'd like for you to do what feels good in your body. So you might not be lifting very high yet. I'm not lifting very high. Play with what works for you. The glutes come off the mat, maybe a little, maybe a lot. And then with time, every exhale, we might go up a little higher. So you're going to start to feel your quads working. Big, meaty muscles, the glutes, the quadriceps. And again, you're working with your breath and not mine. At some point, you're going to feel you're coming pretty high. And then let's just go slow to tap the buns down or don't tap the buns down. So now the inhales are lifting us up. And the exhales are lowering us down. Maybe we're not even touching. If you'd like a little more work for your lower body, don't rest. And if you need that rest, by all means take that rest. We're listening to how this affects the neck. We're beginning to use the arms more and more to see about this whole concept of edge. And at some point, when you're ready, we will hold this bridge posture, Setu Bandhasana. You are welcome to keep your hands pressing if that feels safer. If you feel anything sharp or shooting in the low back, I'd like for you to play with the position of your feet. They might feel better a little further away from your hands or a little wider from one another, or simply lower down just a little bit and maybe you hover in this mid space. Otherwise, we're really lifting as high as we can, as though you're squeezing something between your knees, not letting the knees fall out. And maybe, only maybe, if you're craving more, if you're wanting something different, you tuck one shoulder under, you tuck the other shoulder under, and perhaps those hands come together underneath you. Perhaps they do not. If you clasp, really clasp and press down and hold. Now, if you stay here long enough, you will find your challenge. That's one of the beautiful things about yoga. A pose that has become easy can become harder with time, with long, smooth, slow breaths. Now, eyes can close here. And I'd like you just to watch. Your job is to watch how something that looks static is not, because the breath fills and leaves, because the mind goes to where the mind goes, all the while us remaining unattached. If this feels quite easy and you'd like to move on to full wheel, I will walk you through it. If at any point this is too much, simply come down, perhaps letting knees fall together, perhaps letting knees fall wide, honoring what the body would like. And you're welcome to continue to come up and down as much as you'd like. Simply watching. If you're going for full wheel, we bring one hand against the floor. I would recommend that if this is your very first full wheel, maybe you just play with this, since there's not a live human helping you in the room. That's my bias, that this is best done for the first time or two with an instructor with you. And then of course you put the other hand here. That might be it. You just start to play. Maybe you tuck and the buns come up off of that mat, and you just start to imagine, wow, maybe one day when my wrists are stronger or my shoulder girdle can handle this, I'll go up. Many people like coming onto the head as a middle step. I only recommend that if you're certain that there's not much weight. I would say no more than, I'm going to say 8% on the head. So you start to feel what it's like. I'm using all that we were doing in our Setu Bandhasana, squeezing an imaginary block between my knees, but I'm also using my buns, my arms, and maybe I push up. Again here, is it 3 solid slow breaths? Is it 5? Is it 10? Do not let your ego run the show. If you can't breathe smoothly, you're not meant to be in the pose. And we watch. At any point you come down. Maybe after just one more breath than you think you can take. Some people come to the head, some people come to the back of the head. Again, you can take one of those resting poses I mentioned, or I like Shavasana after full wheel. To feel. And watch. And notice. Again, noticing fluctuations, waves of temperature, of effort, of muscles firing, of muscles releasing, of the energy that is flowing through the nadis, the channels, the meridians in the energy body, watching. So if you're still in bridge, you're welcome to stay for as long as you like. If you're still in full wheel for that matter, you're welcome to stay for as long as you like. You're welcome to repeat this practice as I guide the rest of us through Shavasana. You might like to take a counter pose like knees to chest after full wheel. Maybe even bringing the nose to the knees or towards the knees to round after such a dramatic arch. Anything else that feels good when you're ready? And then you go back down to Shavasana, and I'm going to snuggle up again just a little closer to you. And thank you so much for being here with me and for taking interest in the deeper aspects of yoga, which is how we do it at Evolutions, all of us, in one way or the other, really trying to understand yoga with the capital Y is kind of how I think of it, instead of yoga with the lowercase y, which is quite simply the postures, right? From the outside, it might look like that's what it's all about, but as we become more adept practitioners, we understand the observational skills, the attention span, the kindness, and the tapas, right? The hard work, right? And how we're balancing all of that, balancing a kindness and a softness with a hard work. Balancing these two is a challenge, and it is a life skill. So thank yourself for coming this far to the mat through this practice with me, through any other practice you have. Thank your body for its health, its wellness. I recommend staying in Shavasana as long as you like. I will sign off with my normal prayer. It varies only a little bit every time. May this practice be meaningful. May this practice bear fruit. And may the fruits of this practice benefit all beings everywhere. The light in me honors the light in every single one of you. Namaste. I will see you next Monday, if not sooner, in person, by the pier, or at various pop-up things that are happening. And please be well.